Everyone's just run out of energy, haven't they? Let's try it one more time. Good afternoon. As Panto season has begun early this year. That's fantastic. Behind you, exactly. Thank you so much for sticking it out. I appreciate this has been, as it always is in January, a fairly intensive 2-day affair, and very often one's head feels like there's stuff coming out of the ears because you've just taken so much in. And, of course, there's the networking, of course, often a late night in the middle. So by this period, the weaker souls have failed, but you're here. Thank you very much for sticking to it. I'm not going to spend too long. I have no housekeeping to do. I'm, for once, free. I have only the very pleasant job of introducing our final keynote. Very often, we get very caught up in the detail. And indeed, of course, in this conference, we do try to get very practical about how can we make things better. If I want to do something in mobile or with e-learning or with engaging managers or learners, what do I need to do, practically speaking? That's important. We also have statistical and research as well from our industry and patches of it here and there, but very seldom do we step back and look at the really big picture. And that's what I want to do now in this wrap-up. It's a sort of appropriate moment to think about. We've taken all this stuff in. Now let's put it in context of the big picture. Just chatting with our keynote just now, it's extraordinary some of the people he's talking to. You know, we talk about trying to get the ears of managers. Well, he's talking to the CEOs of large organizations who are talking to the directors of HR who are sometimes talking to the managers that we're trying to talk to, right? So this is the big picture stuff that is turning on the highest level people in the country, but not turning them all on, because after all, not everybody is on board with the skills agenda. So that's a sort of overview of the sort of thing we're going to be tackling in the next hour. Our speaker is the perfect person to talk about such a big picture issue. He was an advisor to the Leach Report. He is an advisor to the OECD. He was a co-author of Ambition 2020, which is the blueprint of where the country needs to be to have the right skills in the future. He is the author of over 100 research reports. So if anybody knows this stuff, it's him. He's from the UK Commission on Employment and Skills. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Mike Campbell.
Oh, that's very kind of you, sir. You really shouldn't clap at the beginning. You don't know if it's going to be worth it, do you, really? But let's hope it is. Thank you very much for that introduction. I hope you find this next maybe a little shy of an hour interesting and valuable. You've had a couple of days talking about all kinds of important and interesting aspects of learning and development, and talking about mobile learning, and talking about how you deliver learning and the most appropriate blend in organizations, and so much more besides. And as Donald said, my job really is to go beyond these specifics of, if you like, learning and development practice, and say a little bit more about if you like, the framework, the frame within which you're doing all this. Why is all this important? Does it make a difference? Could it make more of a difference? What do we need to do to make sure it makes more of a difference in the future? Why doesn't anybody listen to me? Or not as many as should. So these are the big issues, really, that I want to try and tackle over the next 40 minutes. There's a lot of data in these slides. Don't worry so much about that, unless, like me, you're a bit of a data anorak. Just listen to what I'm saying, and I'll give you the key points from them. But for those of you who are interested in evidence, the metrics, the figures, the facts, then you'll see a lot of those up there as well. Okay, so here goes, and let's see what you make of all of this. The place to start is not learning and development. The place to start is not skills. The place to start is not people. The place to start is, what is the point of all this? I don't want to be too philosophical about it. But essentially, the point is thinking about how we can be a prosperous society. And amazingly enough, and it may come as a shock to George Osborne, but there's only two things that matter in terms of securing prosperity for our people. One, how many people are in work? Two, how productive are they when they're in work? That's all that matters. That is what generates, if you like, economic well-being. So if we look internationally where we stand on those very high-level metrics, and I'll show you a more detailed table for the SADOs in a minute, on productivity, we're about 11th best in the world, and on employment, measured by the employment rate, we're 10th. This is not to do with the recession. This is, abstracting from those very short-term, hopefully, things. But they don't change too much in recession anyway. Now, I don't know about you. You may think that's wonderful. You may think that's terrible. I don't know. And we could have an interesting debate about it. We, in the Commission, define world-class, however, as being in the top 8 countries of the world. If you want to be technical about it, the top quartile of OECD countries. Which is a shame there's 30 countries, so being in the top quartile means you have to be in the top 7.5, which is a little bit problematic. Anyway, you might mean 7.4. Anyway, enough of all that. Top 8 will do. So if you define world-class like that, then we're just outside being world-class. So hang on to that. Pretty good, but not the country that we were in the 1870s. You see what I mean? Then you might say, well, does that matter, Mike? How much does it really matter? And I can tell you, and you probably know, but if you just increase the employment rate by 1%, and if you just increase productivity by 1%, then that's worth £20 billion every year, forever. Add it up. 20 billion this year, 20 billion next year, 20 billion the year after. Now, you might say to me, I know we got a numeracy problem in this country, so I'm going to spell this out very carefully for you. I'm sure not amongst the learning and development community, but you'd be surprised at where you find some of the numeracy issues. Anyway, I digress. Although that wouldn't be a digression, because it is a pretty important issue to be serious about it for a minute. But the point is, is 20 billion a big number, as they say? Well, it's big enough to do the following. It's equivalent, over the period of the comprehensive spending review, to eliminate the entire public sector deficit. That's the scale of it. So it's a big number. It's a very, very, very big number, and it's only 1%. Now you might say to me, oh no, let me give you the detail first. For the anoraks amongst you, here's the detail. Here's the top 30 countries in the world. Here's the UK over here. We're, relatively speaking, high employment and high productivity, as I said, but we're not up with the very, very best. The very, very best tend to be the Scandinavian countries, the United States, and you'll see the Netherlands and Switzerland up there as well. Where you definitely don't want to be is down this bottom left-hand corner with Mexico and Hungary and Turkey. Nice places to go, but hey, that apart, they're in a different kind of place. Though some of them, as we shall see, accelerating rather too rapidly for comfort up towards where we are, hanging on in there, just about in the top quadrant. Anyway, that's a matter of detail. The point is, that's very important. And you might say to me, well, Mike, where does learning and development and skills come in relation to all that? Well, the point is that the skills of our people are a critically important determinant of both of those two high-level metrics. How many people are in work and how productive they're in work. In fact, I sometimes say to HR conferences when we're talking about this sort of thing, that's your job, actually. Because that's about the talent you recruit, developing that talent, which is very much your job, and then retaining it. That is what this agenda is about. And if you're not centre stage in that, I nearly said centre fold, that would be highly inappropriate, wouldn't it? Well, maybe appropriate for some of you. For some of you, I think that might not be so good. So it wouldn't be for me. Anyway, I digress again. The point is that it is absolutely important, and as we shall see, of growing importance to productivity, to jobs, and most of all, critically for most of you, to actual business performance. I honestly think, I've been doing this work for like 30 years now in various guises, and I honestly think it is the single most important issue facing actually the human race in many ways. I know the environment issue has moved pretty much center stage over the last 10 years or so, in part due to Al Gore's actually rather dull, for those people who've seen it, film An Inconvenient Truth. I mean, it's very, very well done, but it's a bit like those fantastic postmodern novels, isn't it? Everybody buys it and no bugger reads it or gets to the end of it. But everybody says, oh, yeah, it's a really good film, that. How many people have seen it through to the end? How many people have bought it and not seen it through to the end? There you are, you see, I was right. In fact, I had a numeracy problem there because the former beat the latter rather than, which is not what I wanted. But never mind. So, skills, I'm going to try and show you in a sec, incredibly, incredibly important to that agenda. Better businesses, higher paid work, more people in work, a sustainable economic recovery. I believe none of those things are possible in the medium term without a step change in the skills of our people. Where does that leave you? Well, we'll see at the end of the talk where it leaves you. But at this stage of the talk, it certainly puts you absolutely in the front line. In the front line for business success and in the front line for economic well-being. No pressure there then. You probably don't feel that's where you are in many of your businesses. But that's where you need to be if those businesses are to be fantastic businesses in the coming years. So let's go beyond the rhetoric then. That's old rhetoric. You believe me or you not believe me. Here's some of the evidence if you're interested in that side of things. First of all, jobs. Does all this matter to jobs? Here's the here's the 30 so-called OECD countries. Here's the United Kingdom. And basically what this simply shows, this is the employment rate for people with different, using qualification as a proxy for skill, the employment rates of people with basically GCSE or equivalent, A-level or equivalent, and degree or equivalent. And you can, you don't have to be, an Einstein to realize that employment and skill levels go very, very closely together. If that's a bit too techy and a bit too difficult to take in, just listen to the following statistic. I do a lot of work with the European Commission, 27 countries of the European Union, and I can tell you in a piece that we published last year called New Skills for New Jobs, we showed that during the recession, across the whole of the European Union, 27 countries, the only group in the workforce who put on jobs during the recession were those people who were most highly qualified. Every other single group, as you'd expect in a recession, lost jobs. So even in the worst recession since the 1930s, high-skilled jobs and high-skilled people still mattered enormously. Earnings, which you can take also as a proxy for productivity. These are figures for men. The figures for women are even more startling, I can tell you. Here's the United Kingdom over here. This shows you what's called the private return to individuals, the returns that individuals get in dollars over their lifetime at current prices for acquiring, in this case, like level 3 A-level and equivalent vocational qualifications and degree or equivalent qualifications. And you see two interesting things. One is these returns are extremely high. To get up to level 3, for example, generate something like, $200,000 average premium over a lifetime in current prices. But the second thing to note is the returns in the United Kingdom are much higher than just about every other country. So there's a very strong business case, a very strong individual case for people to acquire higher levels of skills and qualifications, to engage in learning and development in the workplace and outside the workplace in order to generate those benefits. The exam question for a lot of people in this room, and for me, and for the government, I have to say, is why don't more people do it then? So we'll come back to that if there's time. Okay, but you might say, well, that's qualifications. We're not in the qualifications industry. We're in the learning and development industry in the workplace. Quite so. So let me give you a couple of figures on that. Don't look at all of them, but look at a couple of them. Look at number 2 and number 4. These are my favourites. Basically, after a lot of clever econometric work, if you trained about 400,000 more people in this country, it's about 1.3% of the workforce, not a lot. If you trained them up, that would add about 10 billion to GDP, to national output, this year. And again next year, and again next year, and again next year, and so on forever. So, that's interesting. This is also interesting. If you manage to speak to the business strategy director or the CEO or the chair of the board, they'd say, yeah, but all that's, that will all be wiped out by wage gains because people will just get, earnings increases commensurate with that rise in productivity and we'll be no better off. If he says that, he oughtn't to be chairman or chief exec, by the way, but we'll let that pass. He'd also be wrong. He'd also be empirically wrong, because what tends to happen is the productivity effect exceeds the wage effect in most cases, sometimes by more than double, on average about double. And then I like this one as well. This is work we commissioned a couple of years, 3 years ago now. We saw the recession coming, unlike some people, and it's quite interesting because we wanted to see what happened in recessions and what happened. I'll turn it round. What kind of companies go out of business, and what kind of companies stay in business, and what kind of companies grow. And it won't surprise you, but it surprises a lot of other people that there's a strong association between what you might call high-training companies and business success and failure, and low-training companies and business success and failure. But the results are completely startling and shock the hell out of me, even. Because low-training companies are around about 2 or 2.5, depending on the sector, 2.5 times more likely to go out of business than high-training companies. So that kind of evidence, and there's lots more about all sorts of stuff there, and we'll finish, of course, later by looking at these kind of metrics in relation to human resource practices, in particular learning and development. But that's the end bit. That's to keep you from walking out in the next 20 minutes. Well, it might not stop you, but it might encourage you to stay anyway. Okay, so if skills are so damn important then, how are we doing as a country? And this is the bit where you have to sit down and go, oh, I pressed the right button. Okay, again, don't worry too much about the specific data, but essentially this is qualifications as a proxy, and what's happened over the last 10 years and what our forecasting work suggests going to happen over the next 10 years is, for example, take low-skilled people. That's fallen by a quarter in the last 10 years, and we expect it to fall by another third in the next 10. That's fantastic. We are a much more highly qualified, arguable about, skill, depends on quality and so on and so forth, but, as a proxy, at this high level, a far more skilled society, a far more skilled workforce, far more skilled people than we were 10 years ago, and we're likely to be more so. At the top end, it's the same kind of thing, only more dramatic. 44% more graduates in the last 10 years. I'll come to that. Half of them are underemployed, which raises a very important issue. But anyway, so that you'd think, that's not a bad picture. Thank you, Gordon Brown. Thank you, Tony Blair. Thank you, the £280 billion of public funding and taxpayers' money that's gone to do this. Thank you, all the schools in the country. Thank you, the university. I could go on. Well done. Excellent. Fantastic. Got my vote. Can you hear a butt coming? I hope you can hear a butt coming because I can put it on the slide. But. In fact, it reminds me, this is the only joke you get, it reminds me of a story that is an absolutely true story of a government minister. I actually witnessed this speech that he was giving. And he was giving a speech not actually about skills, but it was about the economy more generally. And he came out with this extraordinary line. He said, when this government came to power, we were standing on the edge of a precipice. Since then, we've taken a giant step forward. Dear God, thank God they're no longer in power, but the same party is, so we'll have to see if that happens again. Displaying my prejudices. Anyway, so you do have to be careful about this, because politicians love this sort of stuff. Our reports are replete with all this stuff, how well, how much we've improved, how well we're doing, thank you government, etc., etc. But of course, you know, we do not, I know we're an island physically, but we don't live, you know, the world doesn't stop at Dover. Nearly does, I know, but, you know, it doesn't completely stop at Dover, does it? And secondly, well, there's two big buts. There's many, but I'll give you two today for shortage of time. Here's the first but, which is a picture, a map of the United Kingdom minus Northern Ireland. Sorry about that, folks. But basically, this, I could have showed you loads of it, but this is a map of the proportion of adults who ain't got any qualifications at all. None. Zilch. Nothing. Okay, and the darker the shading, the more of them there are. I don't know where your company's located, but you might like to locate it on this interesting map of skills poverty, as I call it. Because I can tell you that these sort of places that are particularly low skilled, well, let's put it this way, if they were a company, I wouldn't invest in them. That would not be a very sensible thing to do. Your rate of return is likely to be low, your chances of failure are likely to be high. I would, all else being equal, put them in places, if these were companies, where you see these high skill levels. Okay, so that's one problem, the geography of it. You know, nationally, though we've done brilliantly well, in inverted commas, for now, till I tell you the next thing, geographically, it's a bit more complicated. You live in Hastings, or work in Hastings, or your company's in Hastings, or Blackpool, or parts of the northeast, and so on. The picture looks rather more bleak than the national figures suggest. But secondly, and way more importantly, do you know what? While we've been skilling up, one or two other countries have been doing the same. Now, that's amazing, isn't it? Gosh, all those years, what did we think they were doing? They were just going, oh, Britain, oh, look at them. Oh, they're all getting skilled up. That's very good, isn't it? We'll just sit on our arses and, you know, wait till, you know, Christmas comes or something. No, of course not. But they've been skilling up too. And you know what? They've been skilling up faster than we have. Okay, so, here's the figures to back that up. You know, this took a lot of money and a lot of effort, and it ends up with a little table like that, so forgive me for the simplification of it. But basically, this is our international league ranking. If you want to think of football or something like that, whatever it is you're interested in, our current rank on, if you like, the lower skills end, the intermediate skills end, and the top skills end. And basically, where we are, despite, you know, everything we've achieved and we're kind of 19th and 21st. Rather better at high-level skills, but still not quite world-class, but not too bad. Now, remember those figures on employment and productivity I showed you? Where were we? 10th and 11th. So kind of skills, you know, are kind of holding us back. Imagine where we'd be. This is how Gordon Brown told me to tell the story instead of me telling it like it is today. It doesn't matter what he told me because he doesn't matter anymore, does he? But for about 3 years, he was the most important thing to me since sliced bread, as it were. I hate sliced bread, but anyway. Move on. Silly, isn't it, really? But I haven't got the comic timing you need for that kind of joke. But anyway, nor has Gordon, actually, to be honest. I've got a better chance of getting a laugh than he has. Anyway, the point is we're not Premier League, are we? You know, we're not top of the class here. We're not doing really all that very well. And we've done lots of clever forecasting work and all the rest of it. And on current trends, looking also at what other countries are doing and how they're performing, basically, you know, we're going to be, roughly speaking, in the same position in 10 years' time. So basically the message of all that is we need to upskill big time and in quick time. Otherwise, we're in serious danger of being left behind, or even left even more behind. Okay, very quickly, because I need to move on. What's been happening to jobs? Because skills are only important in the workplace if they kind of connect to the appropriate jobs that need to be done. So let me move very quickly on that, and then I'll get on to learning and development before I finish and move on. Okay, well, it is true that there has been very substantial jobs growth in this country. Even now at the end of, well, hopefully at the end, but I don't think we are, of the recession, you've got about 3 million more jobs around than there were 15 years ago. And whatever people tell you, they'd be wrong if they told you that most of that jobs growth has been low-skilled. Most of the jobs growth has been high-skilled. Here's the figures, again, for anoraks amongst you. These are the top 20 fastest-growing jobs in the country over the last 10 years. And what you notice, A, they're an interesting list. They're not the kind of list I suspect that you would think. But secondly, this is the sort of dominant qualification level in those jobs that exist. And basically, you can see they're relatively high skill. Whereas if you did a similar table of the fastest declining occupations in the last 10 years, again, it's a jolly interesting list, but you find that essentially they're, with one or two exceptions, essentially relatively low skill. So jobs growth has been quite highly skilled. Out of interest, the two fastest growing jobs in the last 10 years in numbers, these are in percentages. You might be interested to know what they are. Shall I tell you to save time? I was going to do a quiz, but we ain't got time. Care workers and marketing managers. Which makes the greater contribution to British economy and society is for you to determine. Okay. Moving on. And in the future, basically it's more of the same, but there's a very interesting aspect to recent growth and future development that you might care to think about, which I'm sure you already do think about, which is the growth of both personal service occupations and indeed skills that are often associated with personal service occupations, but in other occupations. So this is my favourite diagram of all time, nearly, apart from the picture of the league table in the Premier League, which has my football club Blackpool in it. But apart from, it's nearly as good as that. But anyway, essentially, don't worry about the detail. Green means it's going up, red means it's going down, and these figures are the percentages as they were over the last 20 years, and they're expected in the next 10 years. The headline figure is this, that, you know, the bulk of the jobs growth is around sort of professional jobs. 47% of all jobs, well, 43% today of all jobs are in these three categories, 47% by 2017. And there's also been this significant growth in personal services and sales and customer services, where if you like, if I can put it this way, what's his name? I've forgotten his first name now, Adair, who was Director General of the CBI, called these high-touch jobs. No, the one before that. Adair Turner, thank you so much. Adair Turner called these high-touch jobs to distinguish them, if you like, from high-tech jobs. Not touch, actually. You get put in prison for that, or sacked, or sacked from Sky B anyway. But thank God. But are to do essentially with some form of relationship. That might be a face-to-face relationship, or it may be a relationship that requires strong oral communication skills or visual cues or whatever. But anyway, are very, very important. And they're increasingly important in all manner of jobs. And if you look even further down the line, if we had time, I could look at what we call the 7 drivers of change. There had to be 7. If it's good enough for Stephen Covey, it's good enough for me. And these are our 7 drivers of change. And essentially, it's all about what is impacting on the changing world of work. If you're interested in this stuff, this report is on our website. But it talks about the underlying changes in the nature of economy and society that are changing the labour market, changing jobs, and therefore the skills needed to do those jobs. Very, very important. Also, when you're looking at these drivers of change, you see some of the most remarkable things. You see, for example, that the Chinese economy by 2015, so that's what, 4.5 years away from now, will be bigger than all the European Union countries put together in terms of economic weight. And there's another interesting statistic which I'm indebted to the Foreign Secretary for. He said in a speech recently that the proportion of our exports that go to Ireland are double those that go to China. Kind of not a good place to be in. Even though my parents are Irish, I can't justify that in economic terms. Anyway, the point is, business as usual in this sort of dynamic is absolutely not an option. Rising skill levels are required. Rising skill levels both within occupations and to reflect the changing pattern of occupations, terribly, terribly important. Moving on rapidly, not to run out of time. When we do all the sort of analytical work and then drill it all down and say, well, okay, where are the likely, very significant needs that are likely to be unmet on the supply side through current changes? These are some of the particular jobs and skill sets that come out from all the work that we have done. The detail of it doesn't matter. It's just to illustrate some of the things that are actually going on in the economy. And where I want to finish, not quite yet. Where I want to finish before I get to learning and development is the following slide, which I also like rather a lot. Peter Mandelson called this diagram and the report, within which it is built, if you like, on this. He called it groundbreaking. I think that was because it was a very big report, which kind of was heavy and kind of broke the ground. But I think he meant something different. But the great shame was 4 weeks after he said that, he was out of power. But he's not around or not, depending on your point of view. Anyway, the point is a way of looking at, have we got the skills that we need as a country to go forward? One way of looking at that in the present is to look at something called skill mismatch. You look at patterns of labour demand, patterns of labour supply, where do they match, where don't they match, and that gives you some kind of indication of the skills that you need and the skills that you might have too many of, for that matter. So just in headline terms, out of interest, politicians love to go on about skill shortages. The numbers here refer to the actual numbers in the category. Skill shortages don't matter terribly much. They matter in certain very specific occupations and very specific localities, but in general they're not a really big issue. The much bigger issue, and I blame you or blame some of your colleagues for doing the recruitment around this, is that when you actually get people in, their line managers find that they ain't good enough, basically, if I'm being really crude about this to keep your interest. But a skill gap exists when somebody is in a job, they've been recruited to a job, they're doing a job, but their line manager thinks they're not, quote-unquote, fully proficient in their job. All this is taken from the National Employer Skills Survey, a survey of 80,000 companies that we do every 2 years. You might be interested in it. Find it on the website if you're interested. But there's 1.7 million of those, which again, I don't know whether you think that's a big number or not. It's about 7.5% of the workforce. One in 13 people are judged by their line managers not to be fully proficient in doing the job that they're doing. What are you doing about that? Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Shouldn't that be close to zero? I'm exaggerating to make the point. But you see what I mean? We're getting close to learning and development territory here. On the other hand, there's all the unemployed folk, who ain't got the skills, and there's a load of them, obviously, who ain't got the skills that are needed to fill the jobs that need to be done, if I can put it that way. They can't get in the labour market. Then you've got underemployed people, which are the sort of mirror opposite of the skill gaps. So this is a pile of people in work who are overqualified, some people call it, certainly mismatched in some way, in terms of their skills and qualifications with the job that they're currently doing. The archetypal one here are graduates in non-graduate jobs. And again, you do have to ask serious questions about this. Is this good for the graduate? Is it good for the company? Who recruited them? And then somebody better. Why have you got these people? Or are you kind of waiting for them to do something else? Anyway, there's issues. That's all I'm trying to say. And then, and I stress this point partly because I sit on the Government's Migration Advisory Committee for my sins, and it's important to note that there are 3.4 million people in the workforce, in employment, not in the workforce, more in the workforce, in employment, who were born overseas. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying it is the case. And you might think, well, why is he saying it's just the case? Because what that is the outcome of is of hundreds of thousands employment decisions that employers have made saying, I would rather you from Estonia or India or Poland or Ireland or whatever, rather than you from London. That says a very great deal about the skills of our workforce, by the way, because they're not doing this for fun. Oh, I'd like to recruit a Lithuanian today. I think I'll go away and do that. They recruit them because they think they're better and will be more productive, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. So there's quite an important issue there, especially in certain occupations. I quite like this diagram. Certainly shocked a few politicians when I showed it to them for the first time. This is the proportion of people in certain occupations who were born overseas. Some of these are very big figures. IT professionals, 1 in 5. Science professionals, 1 in 5. Food preparation, 1 in 4. Health professionals, 1 in 5, and that's just from outside the European Economic Area. Health associate professionals, 1 in 6, so on and so forth. Now, fine. I'm the last person in the world to want to shut up shop in the country. But I'm just saying it's interesting, and it's particularly interesting when I give you the following statistic, which is that the proportion of migrants in the workforce have grown in the last 10 years by 45%. 45% in 10 years. Why? I'm not going to answer that question. Why has that happened? Why are tens of thousands of employers saying, I want you, I think you're better at that than you are? That says more than maybe any of these statistics say about the skills of the UK workforce. Now, of course, I'm not saying, here we get to learning and development, my last few slides, and I'll shut up. I am not saying that the country as a whole and you and your companies do not invest enormous sums of money in skills development. It is true to say that a number of employer organisations are slightly economical with the truth on this and include trainees and learners' salaries in the calculations of how much they spend and so on. I'm not doing that here. This is based on some fantastic work by NIACE, the National Institute for Adult and Continuing Education, who worked 3 years on this. And essentially, anyway, the detail matters, but not for today. But essentially, just as an example, private sector employers, roughly speaking, in a year spend, on proper estimates, we think, about £17 billion a year on skills development in their organisations, on the people who work there. So there's an enormous amount going on, but there are issues about who's doing it and who's not doing it, what kinds of companies do it, what kinds of companies don't do it. It's also an issue about who gets this training, which roughly can be summarised as to he who hath shall be given. I exaggerate to make the point, but the point is, that a lot of people who are already pretty well trained and pretty well qualified and, get quite a lot of training and development, and those kind of who maybe most need it and less to do so. And we've just commissioned some work which is frankly shocking. It shows that individual participation in training, once you dig right down into it, in terms of the level and quality and nature of it, once you abstract health and safety training and some statutory related training, is lower than it has been for the last 17 years. A bit of a warning bell. Right, we come to the nub now. I'm coming to the end, last 5 or 10 minutes or so. And that is the issue of employer ambition. Employer leadership has to be right at the heart of this agenda. Yes, this is about schools and colleges and universities, but hey, 80% of the workforce in this country that we'll have in 2020 are in work today, working with and for you. You will not solve Britain's skills problem by sorting schools out, by sorting universities out. In the long run, of course, you do. In the medium term, it's down to you. I'm sorry, it is down to the companies who employ people in this country. In the end, it's even more important than that. In the end, the skills that we have as a country, it's kind of your responsibility. Because in the end, we get the skills that we deserve, I'd say, in the very long run as a country. You know, if we're a country which is, you know, rapidly moving up the value chain and really into quality goods and services and going for the knowledge economy in a big way, and, you know, you would not have the skill set of the workforce that we do. Demand matters as much as supply. That's partly about the economy, and that's partly up to the government. But in the end, who is the economy? Well, it's all of you, actually, if you add it all together. And business strategy, I'm getting close to the bone now, employer behaviour is absolutely central to all this. The position of your company in the value chain, the sorts of products and services that you produce, the technology you use, the way you organise work, all of that structures skill needs, and therefore ultimately the skills that are actually developed by schools, colleges and universities, but far more importantly by you in your training and development activities. So if you have a company that has a strategic positioning or a business strategy which is skills neutral or worse, then, you know, there's not really very much you can do apart from change that strategy. So the strategy is absolutely critical. And one of the things I'd say, and you know, is what learning and development professionals need to do is not only to get much more influential within the HR function generally, but to help secure the HR function within the business strategy of an organisation. You know the figures far better than I. How many HR directors are on company boards compared to finance directors? Very few. Why? That's mad. They should be absolutely there, right, left and centre in business strategy. But not. Long, long way to go. So management and leadership skills are particularly important, particularly those managers and leaders who don't get it, who don't understand this agenda that I've been banging on about and that your daily work is absolutely concerned about. Some of the reasons they don't get it might be your fault. Some of the reasons might be their fault. But we've got to sort this out, because unless you get a business leadership in this country much, much more committed to this agenda, we are lost in the long run. So that's very important. And then how skills are actually used once you've developed them in the workplace are fabulously important, and therefore HR practices more generally are terribly important. But you are, to genuinely say this, I say this at all events, I'm not making this up for today, are absolutely on the front line in all of this. You have to build the business case for skills in your organisation. You have to be at the heart of HR practices. You have to be at the heart of business strategy. And okay, maybe start the revolution soon. I got carried away on the computer, but we really need a fundamental step change. Now, this is my last couple of slides. Because you might say again, well, it's a bit general, Mike, where's the evidence? What, practically speaking, should we do? And that's where I want to finish, okay? Some of you may have seen this diagram before. Many of you, if not all of you, have seen variations on it, but I'm rather proud of it because we developed it with the Institute for Employment Studies. and Penny Tampkin, who went to Work Foundation, now back at IES. We call it the 4A model of high-performance working. That would be a whole talk in itself. But essentially, these 4 quadrants define what we mean by a high-performance workplace. And one of the 4 quadrants is your quadrant. This is training and development. This is the skills and the capacities and capabilities and competencies of the people in the workforce. And all I want to do in conclusion is to show you 2 things. One, how important this whole nexus is to corporate success. And secondly, how important your bit of it is to corporate success. And to leave you with a rather deliberate provocation, I'm not saying it's true in any sense, with an identification of those, technically speaking, those metrics that are most associated, metrics from learning and development, that are most associated with business success. And see what you think of them. Okay. If we take these 4 together then first, before we get to learning and development, imagine creating an index. We created a whole series of measures of each of these. We'll be looking at the ability ones in a minute. A whole series, I don't know, about 50-odd measures of success. And we combined them, apart from anything else, into an index. And I'm saying this because I'm going to show you some figures about the index. If you increase our index of high-performance working, a sort of combination of all these 4 things, by 10%, what you get, on average, for the UK, are these kind of business benefits. This sort of impact on profits, gross profits, this range on operating profit, this on profit margins, this on sales growth, this from sales and technologies, a whole bundle. I've just lifted some out, which show that high-performance working is strongly associated with higher performance in the business. That's part of what you need to make the business case, I hope, in your organisation very strong. And there's all kinds of things you can do, which I won't bore you with, but you know about very well. But there's one question I want to ask you on a show of hands. Just as an example of high-performance working, how many of your companies, put your hand up if your company is accredited as an investor in people? That's pretty good. That's about 50%. What is it in the UK generally, percentage? That's 7. In the private, maybe it's a bit more, maybe it's about 12. It's 7% in the private sector anyway. Enough said, really, in many ways. I was going to ask you about that. How many of you do benchmarking? Terrific. Third. Anybody use Saratoga, PwC's stuff? No, I'm just interested. There's a whole range of practices which are interesting to kind of think about in relation to high performance working. Anyway, I need to finish, so let me turn to the ability side of things, that top left-hand quadrant, learning and development in particular. And I warn you that this is a terribly user-unfriendly table. This is my last slide. So, in a way, don't worry about the table. I'm going to take you through it. Just listen to what I say. But if you're really interested in stats, this will do it. I'm going to redo this slide. It's useless. The point is, for that, I'm not going to redo the figures, make them up again. I'm not going to do that. I mean, how it's presented. So one or two of them could do with a bit of manipulation, actually. But anyway, I learnt that from the Treasury. No, I didn't. Spot on their forecast, spot on. I like my job, I don't want to lose it yet. So this is the ability lot. Basically, we got 12 indices, they're just indices, 12 measures of that ability component, that sort of learning development activity. And here they all are, all 12 of them. And the ones that are shaded, trust me, although it's not obvious from the data, are the most important. But there's 2 or 3 things to notice before I say what I want to say, and then I'm shutting up. The first thing is, if anybody knows anything about correlation, the relationship, in other words, between a number of different variables, look at that last column. These are essentially the relationship between a whole series of learning and development metrics and business success, measured in a whole variety of ways. These correlations are very high, generally speaking, and in many cases they're higher than those in the other 3 quadrants of the model. But the most important thing is just to have a look at those, in particular the shaded ones, to see the kinds of things that make a difference. And they're only indicators. I'm not saying you should run off and do more of this or do less of that. Just saying it's interesting what these things are. So a very big variable is the proportion of non-management employees who get time off for training. Statistically, that makes a difference to company performance. The proportion of the workforce that have personal development and career development plans actually matters. Now, I know you will know that. Do you know what I mean? But having evidence for it is a different thing, isn't it? And the proportion of employees in a company qualified to degree level turns out to be fantastically important as well. By the way, that's particularly true of managers. Been a big chunk of work done by McKinsey last year and the year before. Fantastic stuff. Read it if you're interested and want to be scared about British management. Anyway, we evaluate development in a system. This is a sort of self-reporting. If you evaluate development activities in a systematic way, that is associated with improved business performance. It's not just something that the HR department want to do and, oh my God, they're at it again, you know. It matters. The actual doing of it matters. And again, self-reporting. Are we really concerned with the long-term development of managers? And you can see these others as well. We evaluate the impact of training on customers and so on and so forth. All of these matter, and some of them matter very much indeed. Anyway, time's run out. There we have it. I think we can safely predict that skills in tomorrow's world will be even more important than they are today. And today, they're way more important than they were 20 years ago. So I wish you worked well in your valuable and important work that really does make a difference to people's lives and to business and economic success. And I hope you found what I had to say of some interest.
I'm just going to ask for Q&A. Thank you very much. Wow. If you